Yeah.
How you doing?
I think you could describe major improvements. I don't know. I was trying to segue into like new Microsoft Store as major improvements, but it didn't really. Maybe I can get some major improvements on my segues.
There was this is I'm going to tie this back, believe it or not, but there was a weird little announcement that went out over the Windows Insider blog
Mm-hmm.
very late yesterday. For me, last night. It was probably like 7:30 at night for me. And it's just this short little thing. It's like we're testing it now in Canary and Dev, and then it will go everywhere. Like we are doing this. It's not without even pretending that this
Mm-hmm.
is like A/B test or whatever. But it's just they've added a button, to the toolbar in the Photos app that links to Microsoft Designer.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, edit this thing you've created or are working on, but in this other app.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft Designer is a web app. It's a PWA, so you could actually install it to your computer if you wanted to. And they've done little other integrations like this, like a snipping tool, take a screenshot,
Yeah.
open it in Paint or whatever, right? Okay. So, yeah, fine. Like, what big deal, right? There was a related announcement. Again, I don't even know why would you explain this? But a week or two ago, they're like, hey, we're updating the Photos app. So the Photos app today, they didn't say it this way, but the Photos app today is what do you call it? A UWP app, right? A modern app. And that stuff is obsolete now, and they're moving on to the next thing. So they, for some reason, felt the need to explain that they were going to transition this app, if you will, to the Windows App SDK, which is the more modern now desktop version of that technology, essentially, right? A way that you can take an existing desktop or UWP app and kind of modernize it, add WinUI, blah, 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 whatever. Okay. I don't know why they announced either of these things. Neither of these things is interesting. Neither of these things warrants its own announcement, right? But they did.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote about it. I'm like, whatever. The store app is the same thing. So you just mentioned how they just like we did something on the back end, and now this thing's like wicked fast, or
Yeah.
faster than it was. I don't use the Microsoft Store interactively per se. I do use Winget to install apps from the store in kind of a batch automated way. But I do access that store a lot because I set up a lot of new computers. And one of the things you do is you check for Windows updates for the system, and you go over to the App Store and you get those apps updated. All the inbox apps get updated, etc. So it's like, okay, I mean, like, what's going on here? But these things are tied together because Microsoft has this, I'm going to call it a bouillabaisse of app types in Windows now, and they're transitioning them to a more modern code base where they can.
Mm-hmm.
Or also, when they make new apps, they make them as web apps, like the rest of the planet, because that's just the focus. So like, there's no major new native Windows app development occurring, obviously. You're not going to see like a new Microsoft Office or Photoshop
Right.
type.
Yep.
Not for Windows, right? But it's maybe notable that those things are, in fact, heading to the web and mobile, and that like you can kind of watch Microsoft as a barometer of where the world is, because you can just see what they do. And what they do is if it made sense to rewrite the Photos app, I bet they would do it as a web app.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't need to be cross-platform. No one's going to use the Microsoft Photos app on an iPad, so they don't, right? Why bother? So they have this technology that will modernize this thing and make it more of a desktop app, which probably makes sense, frankly, because that thing failed, UWP. And but Microsoft Designer, notably, right? Web app. And Clipchamp, web app.
Yeah.
Right. Tied and these things, not all of these things, but all these things tie into AI too, which I think may be the underlying reason they even announced this stuff, because in some tiny way, these things tie into Microsoft's broader AI strategy. And thus these teams want to communicate to the world, and thus to their bosses, hey, we're over here doing AI stuff. right? Because Designer is an AI-based graphic design tool. Photos has AI tools, removing blurring backgrounds, etc. There's more coming. They will probably work locally with the MPU. That will be a story, right? Like the Microsoft Store has an AI section in it now, which is like ludicrous on the face of things. Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
But
Until
that is the point.
right.
The point is AI, AI, AI. And so I think that's, did I do it? Did I tie it all in? I
Yeah.
think that's the point. I know it's a minor thing, but yeah, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, dude. How much insight do we need?
I mean, speaking of AI everywhere, Microsoft shoved some AI where it's not supposed to be. They accidentally put it on some server builds for people who woke up to find their. It's like,
You
boy,
think, listen,
boy.
we live in a world where Microsoft is talking about, and thus will, auto start Copilot
Oh,
when you
yeah.
sign into Windows, right? So the fact that Copilot mistakenly showed up in server, I swear to God, was like a temperature check
Yeah.
just to see how riled up the user base got
Right.
because they want to use this. Think about it. They have the server Copilot or security Copilot, right? I don't understand the need for such a thing. Here's an idea: just make the stuff secure. What's the? I'm not going to want to talk about security with a Copilot. I
Paul,
just want you to do
I
it.
have a better idea. I hear me out on this. I think I've
Mm-hmm.
got this one nailed. Microsoft, you can pay me $1 billion for this idea. Okay.
Okay.
So what they do is they take this Copilot thingamajig, they look at your stuff, it analyzes it, it
Mm-hmm.
produces a number. You might even call it a score, and then they can give you some sort of
Yep.
security score based on your
I like
configuration.
it. I like it. Yeah,
And
like almost as if on the back end they had some sort of, I don't know, best practices and they could match it to those best practices and tell you how well you were doing.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, you mean that thing that's already existed for like over a decade in server. So, and in Microsoft 365, by the way, if you're an admin, I think
yep,
that's the front page of the dashboard, right? And that I think that's my point. Like, obviously everyone's configuration is different and people do have different configuration needs and all that kind of stuff. But I find it weird in Microsoft 365 that you can go, like, you get a score. I don't know what they call it, security score, whatever it is. And then they tell you what's wrong, and you could go through and manually go through this horrible interface and try to configure things as right as you can or want to for your own environment. I don't know. Maybe just do it.
yeah,
Like the value there is that I don't have to do this configuration manually, right? I don't know. Maybe that's the point, though. Maybe you speak to a Copilot and you say, "Look, I want these things to be locked down in this way, but I need to have this ability to, have people interoperate and integrate together, whatever it is." And then it presents you, says, "Hey, look, this is what we're going to do. Does this look right?" And maybe that is the point. And maybe all this outrage over Copilot and server is misplaced because maybe the interface for server core should just be a Copilot, right, instead of a command line. How many mistakes do you make? How hard is it not to make a mistake typing a command line of any complexity? I know it's hearsay. Not hearsay. It's heresy. It's not
However,
hearsay. Yes.
you really want the AI cloud thing just flipping switches on your behalf?
Let me take that question that you just asked and frame it in history, because the argument against Windows NT and its GUI was, do you really want to make these capabilities so easy that you can just click buttons and make things happen? In the Unix world, this all required, I know there were Unix GUIs, but I mean, well, there's a couple of fundamental differences between Unix and NT, but at a user experience level, it was that the NT UIs were built as GUIs first, and that Unix was command line first, and they built GUIs on top of it. Microsoft sort of moved to that model later in time. They talked about it. I think Exchange might have been the only one that actually did it, but the idea behind PowerShell, Exchange, and then eventually server was that you should be able to do everything with the command line and eventually PowerShell, and that the front end, the GUI that you got, if you did get it, was built on top of that command line, and that there was nothing the command line of the GUI could do that the command line couldn't. But you just asked that exact question. Do you really want an AI? I don't know. It's like Do you really want to manage your own email as a company that makes widgets and have a whole team of people and an infrastructure? Or do you want to let Microsoft do it for you in the cloud? This was an actual question, and now it's kind of a ludicrous question aside from maybe data sovereignty
Yeah.
issues, right? I mean, so
Yeah, that's fair.
we push back based on our experience today,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, ultimately, like, no, today, do I want that? No. To answer your question, literally, no, not right now. But should it get there? We always say this with AI, like if it actually worked,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, which is, I know it's a huge, like if self-driving actually worked,
Right. Yep.
wouldn't you want all cars to be self-driven? Because that takes out the human element of the accidents and looking at phones and not paying attention, all that stuff, right? So yeah, I mean, today it's like, do you really want self-driving? No, not today because it doesn't work. But do you see a world where this works and it makes sense? Yeah, right. Well, this turned into a way deeper conversation than I thought it was going to.
You better end it now.
I know. I'm so sorry.